Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, and coming up on today's program, the US President Donald Trump kicks off his four-day Middle Eastern trip, arriving in Riyadh, where he's given a warm welcome by the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman as he stepped off Air Force One. Well, as was the case with his first term, Saudi Arabia is the first state visit of the second Trump presidency. We ask, what does that tell us, and what's emerged from this visit? Hello and welcome to the program. The US President Donald Trump is in Saudi Arabia for what he called a historic tour of the Middle East, his first major international trip of his second term. Well, without delay, President Trump and the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman signed a series of strategic agreements aimed at deepening US-Saudi ties. Well, the memorandums cover key sectors including minerals, energy, security, the economy, advanced technology, even space exploration. Well, the two leaders met in the capital Riyadh, where they highlighted the growing partnership between the two nations. Well, Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United States, Princess Rima bint Bandar, has called the visit a pivotal moment for global peace. Speaking to the New York Times, she emphasized that sustainable partnerships begin with reciprocity. She also noted that Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's plan to invest $600 billion in the United States over the next 4 years aligns with both Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 and President Trump's economic growth agenda. Well, the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman also met with the Tesla CEO Elon Musk, to whom he was introduced by President Trump during talks at the Al Yamama Palace earlier on today. Well, the Crown Prince and President Trump jointly greeted several other high-profile executives, including Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI. Well, let's get the latest from Riyadh, and we can speak now to Joanne Serrieh, who is Al Arabiya English's website editor. Thank you so much for joining us, Joanne. I mean, a really impressive day, a historic day. We saw President Trump getting a royal welcome, looked like a warm welcome. Just tell us what's been happening there in Riyadh today.
I would definitely say it was a warm royal welcome. President Donald Trump, when he arrived in Riyadh, he was welcomed by the Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, as well as other Saudi officials. They then had a meeting, a quick meeting over coffee before heading to Al Yamama Palace, where they had a US-Saudi summit, as well as the introduction of their delegates. And that's where then they later had talks, and then they both will attend. They both have attended the Saudi-US investment forum, where multi-billion-dollar deals are being signed and announced there.
Yeah, some big deals, and this strategic deal that's been announced as well. I mean, this is, of course, the first state visit, the first planned foreign visit of President Trump's second term. And of course, Saudi Arabia is the first stop of this Middle Eastern tour. What do you think that says? What message does that send out, Joanne?
It's also significant to say, Tom, that this is the second time US President Donald Trump makes this decision to choose Saudi Arabia as his first destination for a foreign state visit. This says so much. This says how much of a global player Saudi Arabia is, and how important of an ally Saudi Arabia is for the United States.
And just referring to that investment forum that you mentioned just a moment ago, I mean, I was just looking at a list of some of the attendees. I mean, it's a veritable A to Z, isn't it, of some of the biggest names in global business.
I mean, it's the biggest names you can think of, whether it's in tech, in business. You have Elon Musk, who's the Tesla CEO. Elon Musk is in attendance. OpenAI CEO Sam Altman, they both actually met with Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman earlier in the day. You have the Uber CEO, who earlier announced that we would be seeing autonomous vehicles in Saudi Arabia this year, and many, many other big names. Okay,
so exciting news for the United States and for Saudi Arabia as well. Let's talk about that visit you mentioned, the 2017 visit during the first Trump administration, the first stop, as you said, of the president, as he was then in his first term. How much do you think Saudi Arabia has changed? What sort of a difference do you think President Trump's going to see 8 years later?
We can say so much has changed. We can definitely see now Saudi Arabia as a huge global player and a huge hub for investment globally. So many huge companies are investing more in the kingdom, and that's putting it on a bigger stage, a bigger player on the world stage. And then so much has changed internally with Vision 2030. We're coming so much closer to 2030. We have Expo 2030 coming up with all the preparations happening for that, and then we have the World Cup in 2034 also. So these things were not announced previously, and that's all the preparations are happening for that now, as well as how much has changed regionally, and that's playing a huge role also. Saudi Arabia is playing a huge role in what's happening regionally as well.
Now, one of the big foreign policy achievements of the first Trump administration was the Abraham Accords. A lot of people asking, are those accords likely to be expanded during the course of this regional visit?
For now, we can definitely say that Saudi Arabia is not going to be joining these accords, and Saudi Arabia has made that clear many times, because the main terms that the kingdom has is the establishment of a Palestinian state. And with the Israeli war continuing on the Gaza Strip with no ceasefire in sight and no deals made, definitely the Abraham Accords will not be expanded to include Saudi Arabia, at least not during this trip.
Okay, so just to sum up this visit, obviously there are economic deals, there are geopolitical conversations to be had. I mean, it's a mixture of those two things, isn't it?
Definitely. So today's main focus, I would say, has been on the economic deals. We have, again, the Saudi-U.S. investment forum happening. Again, multi-billion-dollar deals are coming out of this forum. And then tomorrow we have the Gulf-U.S. Summit, where Gulf GCC leaders and their representatives will be in attendance, and they will meet with the U.S. president as well as the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. So we have the economic side, and then as well as the political side happening as well.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you bringing us up to speed. Joanne Serrieh, Al Arabiya's English website editor. Thanks for your time. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tom.
Well, let's get more analysis. We can speak now to Dr. Aziz Alghashian, who is a senior non-resident fellow at the Gulf International Forum and specialist on Saudi Arabia's foreign policy and Gulf-Israel relations. He joins us from Riyadh. Dr. Alghashian, thank you very much indeed for your time. Just to start off with, I mean, I'm assuming there's a real sense of pride there in Riyadh that for the second time, the US president has made the kingdom the first stop of his first state visit since taking office.
Well, firstly, thank you very much for having me, and it's good to join you. Indeed, I think there is a great sense of jubilation, and I think your word is far more accurate, that there is a sense of pride. But why there is this a sense of pride? I think, in my opinion, this speaks to the success, and also this speaks to the fruit of a great deal of Saudi's labor that it had invested in trying to position itself as a middle power, a power in this evolving kind of international order that we find ourselves in. You know, time and again, we're starting to see this role of not just investor, not just a spender in other people's economies, but actually being the recipient of investment. And I think even today, we could see with the who's who coming out of the United States business elites, that they're here and they're choosing Saudi Arabia to be a destination for investment. And so there is indeed that sense of pride.
Yeah, and that's perhaps why the word reciprocity was the word that stood out for me in a piece that was written in the New York Times, an interview, I should say, with Saudi Arabia's ambassador to the United States, Princess Rima bin Bandar. I mean, this theme of a two-way exchange, mutually beneficial agreements seems to be quite a recurrent theme, doesn't it, surrounding this trip?
Oh, indeed. And I think maybe in another term that usually that's thrown, I've had a long day, sorry, but thrown around a lot is transactionality. And I think a lot of the times that when we treat transactionality in a negative sense, it obviously has a damper on the relationship. But I think what the princess has been trying to say, or what I get that she was saying, was that there is a positive transactionality. And then when there is a transactionality that makes sense for both countries, then it has to be a win-win. And it's very interesting to see that an American first approach is actually converging with a Saudi first approach. And then when you have this kind of two nation first approaches meet, this is the kind of result that it will produce. And of course, it's also the beginning of many things. I think this is really the beginning of a great deal of development and developing into each other's economies. But also, this is where the heart of the Saudi strategic vision is to become more independent, more diversified when it comes to its economy. And therefore, reciprocity in this regard is only a strategic gain.
Sure, and the US must be acutely aware that it can't take this relationship for granted, because let's face it, Washington isn't the only player exerting influence on the world stage, nor in the Middle East. Beijing and Moscow, to name two other major powers that have a certain degree of influence as well on the region, a major degree of influence. So do you think the US side is aware of the importance of not taking this, or being perceived to take this relationship for granted?
Yes, I do think so. I think here it's really worth also looking at another buzzword that's been mentioned around the Saudi-American relationship, which is multipolarity. A lot of the times people look at multipolarity and they use it too lightly, in my opinion, for my liking. The fact that perhaps Saudi Arabia now, because there are other options that Saudi Arabia has, that they are just taking the US relationship for granted. And I think this is not the case. In my opinion, I think Saudi Arabia has what I would call an asymmetric multipolar lens when it comes to this issue. That yes, they are willing to work with the United States. They want to work with the United States, but they are willing to work with the United States so long as it makes sense to them and doesn't come at the cost of other relations with other strategic partners like China and others. So I think here the symmetry of this relationship is being reduced, in my opinion. Unlike, I think, the previous decades, we're starting to see a more organic partnership and a more sustainable one.
Yeah, I mean, that sort of is summed up in a piece that you contributed to that I was reading before this interview, in which you say that the Saudis are ready to do business, but not at any price. Just tell us a bit more about what you were thinking when you said that.
Well, I think there are a few things here. And of course, as you mentioned, I am someone who also focuses on Saudi foreign policy towards Israel, and I'm following this. And that's actually what my postgraduate degree was on, looking at Saudi foreign policy towards Israel. And therefore, it was more of a response to those people that were saying Saudi Arabia will do business with the United States in exchange for a recognition of Israel. But I argued against that simplistic notion. What I was trying to say is that, listen, the Saudis are willing to do business. They are, but they are not going to reduce their strategic relations with anywhere else. And the Saudis have been very pragmatic, but also very skilled in managing these kinds of relations. So therefore, I think this is also a response to a very binary perception that is sometimes coming out too much from Western capitals, that it's either us or China. And that's not the way you want to gain much from Saudi. That isn't the way. That's a flawed approach. So I think this is what I was trying to strike at. I was saying that, listen, yes, the Saudis want to work with the United States. They do want to work with the United States. They still see the United States as their main strategic option, but not at any price. Normalization with Israel has a very big price. Trying to move away from China probably doesn't even have a price because that's just too unstrategic. China is too strategic. So quite frankly, people are going to have to realize that this is a different Saudi Arabia that they're dealing with before. And unfortunately, people haven't developed their understanding. Their analysis on Saudi Arabia has not caught up with the reality of where Saudi Arabia is in this evolving multipolar world that we're finding ourselves in.
Right. So you're painting the picture of a nation that is increasingly confident and increasingly assertive. And that, do you think that change has come about in a significant way since perhaps 2017, when President Trump made Saudi Arabia the first stop of his first term? Do you think that's going to be something he sees amongst all the other changes that have happened in Saudi Arabia during these last 8 years?
I think he probably had already seen it, in my opinion, because this is indeed a different region and a different Saudi Arabia. Of course, then, we were still talking about a ruling elite that was still 2 years into their establishment, them being ushered into power. 2030 vision was just over a year old. And there was an immense amount of respective nationalisms around the world. There wasn't a regional spirit that we find ourselves here today. And also that this idea of Saudi first, I think Saudi first, does not mean Saudi alone. And therefore it speaks to the regional lens that Saudi has, that in order for Saudi 2030 to be successful, in order for Saudi Arabia to be strong, it has to be within a stronger region. In a more stable region. And that's what we're really striving towards. And that's only going to benefit even Saudi-American relations. And also it's going to even protect Saudi Arabia from any kind of external pressure. So there is a more confident, a part of that confidence is that the Saudis time and again have actually been proven right in some aspects, such as, for example, the oil spat that took place in October 2022. That the Saudi analysis about the oil pricing was actually more astute than what the Biden administration was putting forth. And, the list goes on when it comes to these kind of presidents. So I think there is the regionality that is taking place here seems to speak a great deal to the confidence that Saudi has.
Yeah, and it's interesting as well, just thinking about a conflict like the conflict between Israel and what's happening in Gaza, the war with Hamas. I mean, to what extent do you think the Trump administration counts on advice from places like Riyadh in terms of determining what the best way forward is? Because, for example, the idea of relocating and evacuating citizens from Gaza and positioning them in other countries was one from which there was a lot of pushback in the region. That idea seems to have been sort of more or less put on hold by the Trump administration. I mean, how much dialogue do you think, how much advice do you think comes from Riyadh and it is directed towards Washington?
Well, there is a significant amount, especially if they want Saudis to play a role. Then there are going to have to be a great deal of coordination. See, because I think right now, almost dealing with anything in the region requires to have a Saudi input. And the reason being is that more and more international actors are looking at Saudi to use their leverage and their kind of weight, whether that's symbolically or financially, or now even geopolitically, to play a bigger role. And at times, the Saudis will say, listen, why do you want us to play a bigger role to clean up some of your mistakes? You need to listen to our input in order to really help you do a better job of what you want to do, or the collective kind of goal that we're all looking for. And so, I mean, the point that you mentioned regarding, I think, pushing out Palestinians and locating them elsewhere, Netanyahu said that he may, if Saudis want a Palestinian state, then they should have it on their home turf or on their state. That came after Donald Trump saying in the Oval Office that the Saudis are not saying that they want a Palestinian state, etc., which received a response, and a strong response, 2 hours later from the Saudi Foreign Ministry. So this is something that also other analysts kind of said this won't happen because the Saudis seem to be more adaptive to Donald Trump, or they will be willing to accept some of the Donald wrath. And quite frankly, I think we've seen that. Now, we've also seen a measured kind of pushback, a pragmatic pushback, a pushback that rechannels that negative energy into something what Donald Trump would probably want to hear about economic development and prosperity. So I think there is, when it goes back to your original question, there is indeed a consultation because, let's face it, if we're going to have to deal with the region, you're going to have to work with Saudi Arabia. And Saudi Arabia is the center of gravity of the region, de facto.
Sure. I mean, you're helping us get a clear picture of an assertive country that pushes back on issues where it doesn't agree and that isn't in the least bit afraid to do so, and promptly, as you say, within a matter of hours. Let's talk about the relationship between the two men, President Donald Trump and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. How would you characterize that relationship, and how important do you think that relationship is in crafting the way forward for US-Saudi relations?
It certainly always helps when there is chemistry at the elite level. Certainly always helps. This is unlike the lack of chemistry that was there from the previous administration. Now, because there was a great deal of frostiness in the previous administration at the elite level, this did not stop, I think, Saudi Arabia and the United States institutions actually working with each other properly. I mean, I think they worked well. So there is, a very workable relationship and a very, I would call it I won't say a warm relationship, if I'm very honest with you, but a very good understanding of each other. They are similar people. They speak the same language at times, the language of business, speak the same language of rationality. And while a lot of the times this allows them to converge, there is aspects where they do diverge. And we've seen that time and again. So it's going to be a manageable relationship. But again, I think at that personal level, a warmth, I won't say a warmth, a chemistry will lead to certainly to a better relationship between Saudi Arabia and the United States.
And just for anyone, for future ideas as to how to approach relations with Saudi Arabia from a US point of view, how would you advise Washington not to approach Saudi Arabia? What would be the things that a US administration should not do, behaviors they should not demonstrate if they want to achieve results and make the relationship go forward in a positive way?
Yeah, the first thing is to not treat them as an ATM. This is the first thing, and probably one of the major things. This is what I would call a Gulf Orientalism, that basically that these people are there simply to pay for our mistakes or pay for our endeavors, and they will provide this money without really thinking about it. And this entitlement almost of access to Gulf money is actually offensive. And therefore, sometimes people would still do this. Their understanding of the Gulf is still in that very Orientalist, unflattering kind of phase. So that's one thing, that if you're going to speak with Saudis, speak with them in the language of investment, speaking with them with a language of rationality, not in the language of entitlement. And that's really, in my opinion, that's the fundamental things. The other thing is that they're going to have to talk with the Saudis and not at the Saudis. And I'm not talking about at the elite level, because I know that happens. I'm talking more broadly when it comes to the respective discourses and the analysis that tends to come out from the United States, and some of the analysis that this is what you need to do to the Saudis. You need to use sometimes people will say the stick and the carrot. You got to listen to the Saudis. And this is one thing that I've come across when it comes to Saudi illusions of Saudi-Israeli normalization, that there's a great deal of what I call Saudi-splaining. that they're actually trying to explain to the Saudis what's in their interest and what they're doing and what they're thinking. And this is very, very offensive. You know, there are Saudis that need to also voice their opinions more, in my opinion. That's why I appreciate you giving me this opportunity. And at the same time, I think it's just time to have a healthier discussion and a healthier discourse, and perhaps focus on developing a healthier American Saudi culture of discussion. This is where a lot of the problems stem from.
Yeah, I mean, you're making it sound like, you know, the page has been turned on some rather patronizing exchanges between Riyadh and some other cities in the world, not to mention specifically Washington. Just lastly, because we're almost out of time, I'd just like to ask you what struck you about what's emerged from this visit to Riyadh by President Trump so far.
In my opinion, I think that was the emphasis on the economic angle. I anticipated that there may be more on the defense angle, or there will be statements regarding kind of American security in the region and American dedication to, American presence. But I was not surprised to not hear that. So I think for me, what struck me the most was how the Saudis and Americans have really emphasized on the economic angle, and this economic angle, of course, as I mentioned earlier, was really, I think, the core, the main strategic element of this meeting and of this summit. And I think it speaks to something else, that still the Saudis still would like a treaty with the United States, and the United States is something that they're dealing with, but they know that the time is not ripe for that. The political landscape in Washington, D.C. does not allow that. And therefore, I think the economic angle, or I would say an economic heavy summit, speaks to the tangibility of some of these deals, that the economic aspect is something that they wanted to develop more and more. So I think that's the thing that really, arised for me.
Okay, well, we really appreciate you sharing those insights with us. A great pleasure talking to you, Dr. Aziz Alghashian. Thank you very much indeed for your time today.
My pleasure.
Let's get more now. We can speak to Mick Mulroy, former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East and a retired CIA officer who joins us from Montana. Mick, great to have you with us once again here on Al Arabiya News. Let's just start by talking about the fact that this visit by President Trump to Saudi Arabia is the first state visit of his second term, Saudi Arabia being the first stop of the regional trip. What does that say to you?
Well, Tom, I think it really comes down to the focus of this entire trip, which is economic in nature as the primary objective. And it looks like there was an agreement signed by Saudi Arabia and the United States that amounts to a $600 billion investment, largely in the United States. So this is something I think President Trump really wanted to focus on, and it looks like it has happened right off the bat, with this being the first on the agenda.
Yeah, so President Trump is certainly, by the looks of things, not going to be going back to Washington empty-handed, and he's only on stop one, day one of his regional tour. One of the things that stood out for me was the Saudi investment minister, Khalid Al-Faleh, who said that when Saudis and Americans join forces, very good things happen. More often than not, great things happen. What sort of things do you think he's talking about?
Well, I do think, of course, this is in line with the Saudis' Vision 2030, where they want to diversify their investments outside of just the energy sector. So I'm guessing that he's referring to this not only as a big win for the United States, of course, but also for the future of Saudi Arabia and having the ability to have investments across the spectrum in other countries outside of just the arena of energy, and ultimately, that is going to be the primary driving factor. But inside of that agreement, of course, is about $142 billion worth of upgrades and substantial improvements of the Saudi defense system. So obviously something the United States can play a key part in. I think I'm biased, of course. We build the best military hardware, weapon systems in the world. And so I think this not only shores up their economic strength, but also their national security.
When we cast our eye back to 2017, to what was the first overseas trip of the first Trump administration, quite a lot of photographs are sort of etched in our memory. The picture of President Trump and the hosts there, Saudi Arabia, standing beside a globe. There was the sword dance. What do you think the legacy of that visit was?
Well, I do think it set the stage that he did at that time, although he didn't articulate it as forcefully, I guess is the word I would use, that economics was really the driving factor in what he would like to do as president of the United States, economics for the United States, improving the U.S. economy, but also improving the ties with some of the wealthiest countries in the world, Saudi Arabia being one, of course, in investing in the United States, which certainly helps the people of the United States and essentially the economy of the United States. So I think this shows that he didn't change much from that time. Yes, there's a lot of pomp and circumstances with these visits, but there's also a lot of substance. And I think we saw, as you mentioned, right off the bat, that he is not going home empty-handed already, and he just started the first stop of this trip.
I mean, a lot is happening in the region, and we've been talking to other guests about how Saudi Arabia has emerged as a really important diplomatic heavyweight in the region and on the world stage. What sort of progress can we expect? Do you think there'll be any spin-off benefits to some of the long-standing issues in the region? I mean, there are plenty to choose from. The situation in Gaza, the Houthis in Yemen, the situation in Lebanon, which has improved but is still the cause of some concern, the Iran nuclear ambitions. I mean, do you think we can expect some tangible results on some of these geopolitical hot-button issues as a result of this trip?
Well, Saudi has, as you said, Tom, emerged as a key player in a lot of these very delicate negotiations, as has Qatar, which is on the trip, I think, the next stop. But when it comes to Saudi, they certainly play a role when it comes to mediation on the Ukraine issue, but more regionally, the Iran negotiation. So obviously, this has been a strained relationship between Saudi and Iran in the past, but they seem to have taken steps to improve that, and that might also align with President Trump's desire to gain a new nuclear agreement, so JCPOA 2.0, as we're calling it. That is something that is key to happen. If it doesn't happen, there could be direct military engagements by the United States and potentially Israel against Iran, which could completely destabilize the region. So it is not only in the U.S. and Iran's interest to see an agreement reached through diplomacy, but also in Saudi Arabia and the region's interest to see that happen, as the response by the Iranians could seriously damage trade, energy, transfers, all sorts of things in the region if Iran responds, as they have claimed they would, against any kind of direct military attack on their nuclear facilities.
Okay, and at the same time, I'm moving away from Iran and looking at Israel. I mean, the fact that Israel isn't on this itinerary of this Middle Eastern tour, is that something you regard as significant?
I do. I think a lot of people are wondering if there's been some kind of strain in relations between the United States and Israel. We saw the United States directly engage with the Houthis to come up with a bilateral ceasefire, if you will, that did not include Israel. We saw the United States dealing directly with Hamas to recover one of our citizens, Idan Alexander, something that the Israelis didn't want to see, at least reportedly didn't want to see. They want to be involved in all those negotiations. And so I do think there is, one could see that that they aren't included on this, something that I don't know exactly the reason, of course, but if you add all the other events recently, it does look like there's some kind of strain in relationship. I don't think it's going to be a rupture. I don't think that would ever happen. But there is some indicators that there is a bit of a challenge right now.
So you wouldn't hold out any hope that the Abraham Accords are likely to be expanded anytime soon?
Well, that's a good question. Another factor in this meeting in Riyadh is that at least it's been reported in the media, that Ahmed al-Shara might meet with President Trump on the margins, as they say, of these meetings in Saudi Arabia. It's likely they're going to discuss what Trump usually likes to discuss, which is potential U.S. Access to key natural resources. But one of the, I think, factors that al-Shara might bring up is that if we normalize relationships between the countries, that he might be interested in some kind of negotiated agreement between Syria and Israel that could lead to another member of the Abraham Accords. That's a lot of speculation on my part, but certainly I'm not the only one speculating that might be part of the conversation between President Trump and President al-Shara.
So in terms of the sort of the balance between these sort of geopolitical issues and economic issues and deals that are being struck, where would you say the emphasis is? Do you think it's sort of a 60-40 economic trade deal sort of relationship versus the geopolitical issues? Where would you say the most accent is being placed?
I think that sounds about right. I'm sure that these security issues are being discussed. They might not be leading the discussion, the Iran potential for a nuclear weapon, the ongoing war in Gaza, which of course is a significant issue for all the countries that President Trump is visiting. Likely won't see an expansion of the Abraham Accords until that is brought to an end and there is a permanent ceasefire. But I do think that he's trying to emphasize the economic aspect of this trip mostly publicly. But I'm sure behind closed doors, there's a lot of discussions on all of those issues. And hopefully some progress can be made, certainly in ending the war in Gaza and the diplomatic path toward a new nuclear agreement that doesn't involve direct military intervention.
We heard from John Alterman, Senior Vice President for the Center of Strategic and International Studies, saying this region, referring to the Middle East, is President Donald Trump's happy place. Do you agree with that? And why do you think it would be his happy place?
Well, I think he feels like he can deal directly with individuals that have the ability to make decisions when it comes to investments themselves. I mean, in modern democracies, that usually involves a lot of, congressional or parliamentary notifications and approvals and the like. So I think he feels like this is a very ripe area for increasing investment in the United States. And I think he has a very good relationship with the leaders in this area. It's not normally said to be a U.S. president's happy place, not that there's anything wrong with the Middle East, of course, but obviously so much of the strife and conflict happens there, whether it's in Yemen, whether it's in Syria, for example, and now the war in Gaza. But I think when it comes to economics and our ties with the key Gulf countries in the region, all presidents view this as an extraordinarily important region and one that would be ignored at the peril of the United States under any administration.
Okay, and just lastly, just to sum up our conversation, why is, in your opinion, Saudi Arabia such an important ally for the United States?
Well, they've been essentially from their beginning. The economic aspects of Saudi Arabia, the importance of energy throughout the world, our key strategic partner when it comes to countering Iran, obviously when it comes to countering terrorism, which we don't talk about a lot anymore, but one big terrorist event, and that's all we'll be talking about, Tom. So, and Saudi Arabia is key to all those things. And I think every president, Democrat and Republican, understand that to be the case. President Trump obviously does.
All right, we leave it there. We're out of time. Thank you very much indeed, Mick Mulroy. Always a pleasure talking to you. Let's get more now. We can cross to Matt Terrill, former Chief of Staff for Marco Rubio's 2016 presidential campaign, now managing partner of Firehouse Strategies. He joins us from Washington. Matt, always a pleasure talking to you. We were just looking earlier on at pictures of the US Secretary of State and National Security Advisor Marco Rubio traveling with the president to Riyadh. The first stop of a first foreign trip of a brand new administration. What does that tell us, do you think, about how Washington views its relationship with Riyadh?
Well, certainly, I think President Trump in particular views this as an important trip and a relationship that's worth continuing to enhance and to build on. And you saw him do that in his first term in Trump 1.0. Obviously, in Trump 2.0, he's doing exactly that, continue to build on their successes, and that is partially investment in deals, particularly around key investments and trade. But obviously, there's diplomacy at play here as well. And so I think this is a trip that's very important, not just for investment deals being done or trade deals being done, but obviously where things stand with respect to Iran and discussions with trying to improve relations with Syria. Those are all things on the diplomacy side, diplomatic side, that are going to matter. An important trip, and so far it looks like it's off to a great start.
Yeah, I mean, diplomatically, lots under discussion. In terms of deals and in terms of trade, a lot seems to have been agreed. On the deal side, what sort of stands out for you from this visit?
Well, we'll see what happens at the very end of all of this, to see how these discussions take form. But, look, I think that there's going to be likely an emphasis on deals related to AI. Obviously, defense security is going to be important as well. So we'll see where all these deals take shape. But I think going into this, it was clear the administration felt that this was largely a business trip in the sense of trying to strike continued deals for the United States. I think this administration particularly feels good about the momentum they have in terms of investment being made in the United States by key companies. And obviously, we're seeing it's not just President Trump on this trip. We're seeing a lot of different CEOs who are going to be in the room, if you will, who are at this venue as well, going to be a part of this trip as well. So it just tells you that from a private sector side, from an investment side, that's obviously vital. I think obviously AI is going to be key. Defense will be key. We'll see where the other aspects, energy will be another component, but we'll see where the rest of it goes here. Yeah, right. And we saw the CEO of OpenAI, Sam Altman, there in Riyadh alongside President Trump. Clearly, some big deals are being struck. In terms of how this is being viewed domestically in the United States, I don't know how much coverage this Middle East trip is receiving there. What do you think President Trump has to come back with? Well, first of all, it's receiving a great deal of coverage here in the United States. And I think it's just building, for many Americans' views on the promises that President Trump made in his campaign for president in 2024. And that was that he was going to work to build relations around the world, peace through strength, and really an America First agenda. And to that end, what Americans expect is that they're going to get good deals with the United States out of this trip. And again, whether that's with respect to AI capabilities or energy, other key components that are vital to Americans nationwide. What they want is what many voters who voted for President Trump saw in candidate Trump and now President Trump and Trump 2.0, and that's a deal maker. And so I think the vast majority of Americans want good deals for the United States, whether it's on trade or whether it's on other key components, that's going to matter. So as long as President Trump leaves this trip highlighting that he has been able to expand investment in the United States, that's going to be a win for this administration. It sounds like they already feel good or announced $600 billion of investment out of this. Obviously, President Trump went into this wanting $1 trillion in investment. And obviously, that's going to be important for Americans to see that on this trip. It sounds like it's off to a strong start for the president right now. Yeah, and since you mentioned AI more than once, let me just sort of thrash that out a little bit more, because the US appears to be happy to share its AI chips and its AI technology with Saudi Arabia. And do you interpret that as being a sign of trust between the two countries? Well, certainly I think President Trump does have trust with these leaders. And to answer your question, yeah, I think President Trump's trying to build on that trust. I think you're seeing that not just with AI capabilities, I suspect, I'll let the administration speak for themselves on that, but I think you're seeing it just with President Trump being there as really his first official trip, if you will, as a president. That speaks volumes to what he is doing here, really trying to not just champion the golden age that he talked about for the United States, but also recognize that the Middle East wants to and is entering, if you will, many would argue, that golden age as well. And so I think it's just the timing of this is very unique. President Trump spoke on election night of that golden age that he wanted to lead the United States in. Leaders in the Middle East have talked about that golden age that they want to direct the region in. I think right now what President Trump's trying to do is have synergy build great partnerships in the region, not just when it comes to private sector investment, to your point, but obviously when it comes to foreign policy dynamics, diplomacy, all that's going to matter right now. We'll see where this all goes, but I think Americans are happy to see a president in President Trump who's trying to build and enhance and expand relationships here.
Yeah, and since you mentioned diplomacy, I mean, President Trump is in Saudi Arabia today, a country that has shown its diplomatic clout in recent months, even several examples of it, serving as the venue for those important bilateral talks between the United States and Russia. Do you think the perception of Saudi Arabia in the minds of many in the corridors of power in Washington has changed since, for example, the 2017 visit at the start of President Trump's first term in office?
I do think it's changed, not just in Washington, but frankly with the American people. And obviously, people have their different views on certain things as it relates to all these dynamics. But I do think the perception has changed. And I think that President Trump, I suspect, is trying to drive a lot of that. And so, too, it appears, at least from what I can tell, I think many watching from the outside what's happening in the region, the leaders of that region recognizing the need to lean into that change as well. I think you've seen many of the leaders in the region really emphasize that. And so I think to that end, it's a two-way street. Obviously, President Trump, I think, is doing his part by going over there, being there now to try and build on these relationships, forge good relationships here as he's doing in other places around the world. And obviously, it's on the leaders in these countries to do their part to make sure that they are leaning towards that as well. I think if you have that take shape here and continue to take shape, I go back to the theme seems to be that golden age. It's something that President Trump championed here in the United States. I think it's something that leaders really, in all these countries appear to be, or at least for the most part, from what I can tell, appear to be really trying to lean into. That's how it's going to be a big part of these discussions is talk about that $1 trillion investment, key investments in the United States. All that's going to matter. But at the end of the day, I think the perception has changed, and we'll see where this all goes.
Okay, so Saudi Arabia, as we've been saying, the first stop of a three-nation tour of the Middle East, the first state visit of this new Trump presidency. One of those three stops is not Israel. Does that tell you something?
Yeah, I'll defer to the administration on why they chose their itinerary here, but I don't think it tells you anything. I think right now, obviously, President Trump is doing what he's doing behind the scenes in many cases, of course, when it comes to trying to end war, something he campaigned on. And that's what we're seeing take place in the Middle East with respect to Israel and Hamas, or whether that's with Ukraine, Russia. I would just warn people that there are going to be certain things that would be taking place behind the scenes that the public's not going to see. So whether that's private phone calls with world leaders or whether that's behind the scenes negotiation, I would just urge people not to read too much sometimes into these decisions are made over travel or other dynamics that typically take place in the public stage. I think the real question is what's going on behind the scenes with negotiation. I think you're seeing momentum from the administration, particularly with the release of the recent hostage, American-Israeli hostage. So I think they feel there's momentum taking place as it relates to hopefully moving towards an end of the war. But ultimately, I wouldn't read too much into it. It's ultimately up, though, to the administration to decide what they do on travel, and let's see what they say about it as well.
Okay, so putting speculation about the relationship between President Trump and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to one side, are you confident that the Abraham Accords, which are a key pillar of the first Trump administration, a key diplomatic triumph for that administration, do you think they're going to be expanded during the second administration?
Yeah, we'll see. It's my understanding, I saw reports, and I don't know if these are accurate or not, but that Jared Kushner, who was instrumental in the Accords, kind of 1.0 Accords, if you will, may very well be playing an involvement or some role in this, for the 2.0 Accords, if you will. To answer your question specifically, I think we have to wait and see. I do suspect that that's going to be discussed here on this trip. No question about that in my mind. It was such an instrumental, pivotal component of President Trump's accomplishments. He would argue, I think, and he really championed it as being a key accomplishment in his first term. I suspect something that we'll see if there's expansion on it. Obviously, that's going to be a two-way street on how that all works. But let's see what happens here. I don't think we have enough information yet to really say for certain that that's going to all happen. But I think the administration, I suspect, is going to be working with the leaders in the region to see what happens with those 2.0 Accords and where that very well could go here.
Why do you think the Middle East is so important to this administration?
Well, I think there's a number of things. First and foremost, I think, this administration really wants to continue to champion investment in the United States. And I think they see great opportunities for investment from Middle East partnerships with respect to investment here in the United States. I think the other side of this is just recognizing the core components as it relates to the challenges that we're facing in the foreign policy stage, whether that's policy related to Iran and ensuring that Iran does not receive a nuclear weapon or acquire a nuclear weapon. That's a key component of this, I think. And so you're going to likely see that, of course, without question, in these discussions taking place on this trip. The other side of it is just Iran, but also Russia and China. And if you think about what China's been doing in particular around the world, I think recognizing the importance of strategic alignment between the United States and other key countries, particularly in this key part of the world. And part of that's proximity to Iran, but part of it is just also the side of investment as well. So I think it's multi-pronged when you look at this. I think it's and not or. I think they look at it through the lens, the administration looks at it through the lens of putting a premium on great investment opportunities, but also putting a premium on the need for strategic alignment as it relates to Iran in particular, but also China, Russia. I think all those things are likely to be on the table in terms of discussions here taking place throughout this week.
Yeah, and we've been talking to other guests on this channel today and in previous editions about the importance of reciprocity in the diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and its allies and friends around the world. I mean, of course, Washington not alone by any means in exerting influence in the Middle East. Beijing and Moscow are also influential in this part of the world. How aware do you think Washington is of that influence and the importance of not taking any relationship for granted?
Yeah, I think they're very aware. And this administration is very aware, and particularly as it relates to China, for example, to your point about the presence that they're having around the world. I mean, I think you saw that, for example, at the Panama Canal discussions that took place and where President Trump and his foreign policy team really worked to try and correct course there, in their view at least, of what needed to be done there as it relates to China's dominant role as it related to the Panama Canal. I think as it relates to look at the Middle East, I think there's no question that this administration, I suspect, has concerns around China's involvement or presence in the Middle East. I think the same can be said, though, as it relates to Iran policy. I go back to that. That's obviously front and center. I think, and I could be exaggerating a little bit here, but just about every day I hear President Trump talk about Iran not being able to and should not be able to and cannot be able to receive a nuclear weapon or acquire a nuclear weapon. So obviously, I think some of the strategic elements around that are going to be important, whether that's positioning in terms of potential military capabilities or other capabilities. We'll see where that all happens. I don't mean to be too vague with that, but I just don't want to get in front of what the administration may or may not be doing when it comes to these discussions around Iran and the Middle East, discussions we're having this week. But all in all, it comes down to this. It comes down to President Trump campaigned on building relationships, trying to build strategitic relationships and bring alliances into the fold here. And I think President Trump has really prided himself in Trump 1.0, his first term, on trying to, whether it's the Accords or Abraham Accords or other capabilities, really trying to build great relationships in the Middle East. And I think what you're seeing right now in Trump 2.0 with this trip is trying to just build on that. I think they received about $450 billion in investment in Trump 1.0. He's aiming for at least $1 trillion, it sounds like, an investment in this Trump 2.0. It's partially about investment, but it's also back to Iran and other key diplomatic and foreign policy elements at the stage here. The difference between this second term and his first term, there's just a different world we're living in terms of the foreign policy dynamics. That will shape discussions this week as well.
We heard President Trump hailing the 80 years of close relations between Riyadh and Washington whilst he was there. Just where do you see that relationship heading to during the remaining 3 years and however many months left of this second Trump presidency?
Yeah, look, I think President Trump wants to continue to champion the relationship. I think he's in a position right now where he feels as though, that there's great momentum right now, not just with that relationship, but with him trying to bolster key relationships around the world. And so I think if it comes to, back to those investment discussions, and this largely being, like I said, a business trip, if you will, with a premium on investments. But again, I go back to, this is just a different world that we're living in than Trump 1.0. I think there's no question he recognizes the challenges that are taking place in the foreign policy stage right now. And one of the core themes that President Trump campaigned on was peace and prosperity, namely peace around the world and prosperity for the United States. And so every decision he's making on the foreign policy stage or when he's having discussions with world leaders is how's it going to be helping to make America stronger, safer, and more prosperous. And so I think if you look at this trip, in the trips I think he will take place going forward here to the region, if he does additional trips, which I suspect he will, it's going to be through that lens, making America stronger, safer, and more prosperous. And so at the end of the day, I think the American people will rally behind the president, or at least the vast majority of Americans will rally behind him doing these kind of trips and trying to forge and build on great relationships in the region. It all comes down to it being a successful opportunities, particularly for the United States, as President Trump fulfills the promises he made to continue to lead America into that golden age. And I go back to, not to be repetitive on it, it sounds like the Middle East is trying to lead to a golden age as well. The timing is unique here, and I think President Trump's trying to seize on it.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time. Matt Terrill, thank you again.
Thank you.
Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.